I hear drinks. There's alcohol at these things? Sweet. So we're going to talk about open source threat intelligence and building the program around that. Is that too loud? Anybody getting bleeding ears? Okay. So I'm gonna start this off explaining how all of this actually came about. I am a former sailor, so at times my language might be colorful. So I like to make sure and have the disclaimer up there. I am a JADED information security professional. For those of us who work in information security, we have to have a thick skin because we are the industry's red-headed stepchildren. Nobody wants us. Everybody has to have us. But, you know, this all started out of a couple of different aspects, and it culminated when somebody actually accused me of being a certified FUD peddler and a narcissistic vulnerability pimp. But we'll get to that here shortly. So a little bit about myself. I'm an Iowa farm boy. This is my brother, my younger brother Joe, who now dwarfs, or I now am dwarfed by. I am a tech weenie and geek. I wear that moniker very proudly. I just tend to work on the business side more, but I do relate more with technology because unlike most people in business, tech does what I need it to do, business sort of not. I was in the Department of Defense, a dashing sailor that I am. And yes, my ears have been tucked back since then. I've had surgery. I like to tinker and I'm curious by nature. I think a lot of us have that why does it work this way mentality, especially if we're in information security. We've got to answer that question of why. I'm a big science fiction fan. In fact, I'm the guy in the white here. I'm certified in security stuff. I also was a gluer on the data analytics and visualization distribution that just recently released this year. Got to work with a great team building data visualizations. I find it's a very effective way to communicate a message is if you put it in pictures. And while I don't know everything, I can Google the hell out of stuff. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Oh, by the way, for those of you who are wondering, yes, I do have tickets, so feel free to ask away. That's not a valid, but I don't know. Let's take a consensus. Oh, you already have one? May you have one. Let's take a consensus. Does that work? No. Okay, no, sorry. If you were on a lifeboat on the Titanic, you'd have been voted off the boat by now, so sorry. So what if we had this aspect of being able to mitigate and prevent problems and incidents before they occurred? You know, what if we had the ability to stop some of these things? You know, malicious software, people scanning, botnets, you know, people who are phishing. You know, what is it that our networks are communicating with? Who are they communicating with? Where is it coming from? Does everybody have these types of questions? What if we could do all of this and protect and save our businesses? Or at least reduce it to a manageable level because all of us are staffed properly, right? We have a team behind us. We have enough money. I'm not seeing anybody say yes. Okay, so we're struggling a little bit. But what if we could do this? Well, good news, everybody, we can. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of how this actually became the genesis, the declaration of FUD and how to dispense FUD because it's real. It's not FUD if it is real. We'll talk about the Internet of Bad Things, then we'll get into how to actually build a threat intelligence program. I'll walk you through some of the steps that I used to actually build the first gen and subsequent generations of a threat intelligence program before I got smacked upside the head sideways with something else, but also what the business value of all of this actually is. So in the beginning, there was the internet, and Al Gore said it was good. So let's dispense something. We've all heard the term security through obscurity, right? All right, I'm done with saying that. We're just going to go with denial, hope, and faith because people aren't listening. You know, we've got this mentality that we're doing things. So over the last, actually starting in 2010, started with somebody actually making the comment at a conference in Ohio that said, who would attack us? We're in Ohio. And I just sat back for a second and went, wow. Working with a retailer, they were making the comment that, well, who would attack us? We make clothes. Well, that doesn't sound right either, We're too small to be on anybody's radar. That came from a healthcare provider. And again, I'm sitting there and I'm asking these questions of, well, wow, are really people actually doing this? On the business side, compliance and audit folks, this is where the majority of that was coming from. Because I don't think anybody in security is actually believing any of this, right? Do we believe that we're too small to be on anybody's radar? No? Okay. We don't have anything anybody would want. That was the best one that I heard, and I was like, so why are you in business? Well, we sell a product. Oh, so people do want things, you just don't understand. And then, from a payment processor, we do not have a large footprint. And again, makes me wonder. So each time I heard one of those statements, this is what was running through my mind, because I've gone through Dale Carnegie classes and I know to keep my mouth shut. But this is what I was thinking. That's the Foxtrot, by the way. Everybody know what that is? Jack Daniel's whiskey. Tango. I kept asking myself the question, what the failure? Then one peaceful day, someone actually accused me of promoting FUD because I'd made the mention that if you go on the internet, you have the likelihood of being attacked. And oh my God, that was FUD. I was promoting fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I got upset. So I decided to take a different approach from it. Anybody come from academics? Okay, so when we come from an academic community, when we're posed a hypothesis, we generate and we gather data to collect to be able to present our argument, right? It pretty much works. I also had some spare time on a Saturday afternoon and started my efforts. So from my aspect, what I was looking at was the problem was that people were not allowing themselves to understand or accept that bad things happen on the internet. Who would attack us? We're too small. Don't have a large footprint. I don't even know what that really means. We don't have anything anybody would want. Why would anybody attack us? So people were looking through life through rose-colored glasses, which for me, when it was compounded working with all the different industries, was sort of like everybody was looking through rose-colored glasses because this just wasn't reality. Ed's going nuts. I must be crazy. So driving back to the initial questions of who, when, and why. Again, these questions I started asking. So I decided to come up with a solution. I needed to get a Patsy server. I needed something to be able to demonstrate that I'm not nuts. Has anybody ever had to build a business case for business? Yeah. That's the way a business usually tends to prove that they're not nuts. Well, this is my way of proving that I'm not nuts. So given the fact that I am in information security, and by nature I am not the most athletic individual, I tend to like to do things as simplistic as possible. So I needed something that was going to be simple to set up. And that was the crux of the first part. I started off with the mentality of thinking, well, this will be simple. No, because it became very complex afterwards. Low maintenance. Needed something expendable, something that I didn't mind losing if somebody took it over. Basically, I needed Oswald. So this is the concept that I ended up coming up with. I created my own private daily plaza. We're going to put Oswald out there and he's going to take the hit. Now, I started off using this from a residential IP address, and it had 2 listening services. Now, I admit that I could have just used one to make it as small a footprint as possible, but I wanted to be a little bit more, see what was out there, see what people were doing, what was going to be the impact. So I got all this set up in November. Actually, as you can see by the timestamp, and it came alive. I brought the system up online. But that was the aspect of now I've got this up and running, now what? Is anybody going to take the bait? I just put it out there on the system, or on the internet. So my first attack came in 16 minutes after I put it up online. But it's okay because they're from South Korea, right? South Korea is one of our allies, so that makes me feel better. That was, what's that? Yeah, North Korea, South Korea, China, it's off the internet. But that was the first attack. So the first web attack came in the following day, and they're out of Texas. So that's, Lone Star State, they're ready to secede at the drop of a hat. So how do I know it was attacked? Well, when I put the system up online, I did not promote it as a public server. It was on a residential IP address, which normally that's where consumers live. So I wasn't broadcasting this out, and folks like Comcast and Cox and Time Warner Cable before Cox bought them and whatnot, they frown upon you running any type of services because that degrades their performance, not the fact that they're throttling back Netflix on me. I didn't submit it to any search engines. I didn't do any SEO, didn't put any meta tags that would draw people to me. So from my perspective, nobody should have known about this service being online. Yes? No. This is straight raw IP address. And the only purpose was for the purposes of me gathering data. I did not promote it, did not educate it. Plus, I'm pretty certain when I took a look at the details that was not a normal web traffic request. Call me crazy, but anytime somebody tries to cat the Etsy password file, that's a bad thing. I thought it was humorous because I'm like, really? So ultimately, and I don't know how well you can see this right now, depicted in red and green, a lot of activity out of China, some in the US, but this is just from the first 30 days that it was online. In the first 30 days, I had experienced over 45,000 unique attacks against the systems, either SSH-based or from a web-based attack. And when I say web-based, only port 80. But this could be a coincidence because I'm from Columbus, Ohio now, right? We've got Nationwide that's based out of there, Wendy's International, The Limited, Chase Bank's out of there, AEP. They could have mistaken my network block for one of them, right? Yeah, monkeys might have flown out of my butt. So I had some preliminary findings and I needed to get more data because now that intuitive nature in me that has to ask that question why started kicking in. How do I get more data? Well, honeypots. Lots and lots of honeypots. And we all know what honeypots are for, right? Yeah, well, it's going to change this one up real quick. So they have to be attractive to an attacker. An attacker that's looking at them has got to find some value in them, right? They've got to look sexy. They've got to be, ooh, they've got these services. They've got all this stuff. So I started going into defining and developing requirements around honeypots, offering more types of services that potentially could be exploited. Again, for my purposes, I wanted to see what the attackers were doing, whether or not it was an actual attacker or a bot, finding out whether or not, they were trying something new that hadn't been seen before, or, is this repetitive? And it was also a way to meet some really interesting people along the way. So there's nothing like fun to watch somebody break into a box and you start a chat session with them. That's a really good way to figure out if they're a bot or not. Break in, start using some talk commands, and they're like, who are you? I'm just watching my system. So why do criminals find this attractive? Because that's ultimately what they find attractive is just the IP address. Is it reachable? Does it have services that I can exploit? So I put out the honeypot. Again, low maintenance was a requirement. Had to yield a high amount of data, which means I had to have a number of services that were responding back that I could actually collect and use from some information on. Again, not broadcasting the information out there. It's not resolving to a DNS name. It's not being put out on Google, or China Google or wherever. It's just a residential IP address. So what I ended up selecting was an application called the Dioneo Honeypot, which replicates your common SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, your standard services, as well as some Microsoft services as well. So this allows me a great wealth of information that comes in, because what I started discovering as I was filtering and transposing some of the data, I would see the same IP hitting secure shell that would also hit a Microsoft Service Network or application. Now, for those of you who know, where does SSH normally reside? Where? 22. What type of platform does it reside on? Runs on typically on a POSIX compliance or a Unix platform. Would Microsoft services be running on a Unix platform? No. So one of the things that I was able to do was deduce that if somebody was attacking both ports consistently, it was probably most likely a bot. You know, and it was rather interesting to see the activity span through. You know, so I'm getting all this information, and then I became that addict. I kicked into that addict mode where now I've got this information, I need more. I need more, I need more. Anybody ever have that where you like start at the computer at like Friday at 5 o'clock and the next thing you know it's like Monday morning at 3 a.m. and you're like, where did my weekend go? Oh, come on, I'm not the only one. Warcraft, okay, touche. So one of my colleagues had asked me the simple question of, okay, great, you're getting all this information, what are you going to do with it? Now, keep in mind, I'm a sci-fi freak. So following the Chronicles of Riddick, you know, I'm going to keep what I kill. But then I started thinking about it from a business aspect because I am a capitalist and I like to make money. So one of the things that I noticed was, you know, look at it from an intelligence aspect. You know, what can I find out? You know, what are the sources of attacks? Are they automated attacks or are they something else? What was the historical progression of bad? Am I seeing the same threat actor time and again? Now, one of my side things that I do is I work in attack and penetration. So guess what? Every time I got a new binary uploaded to my Microsoft Windows, I'd take a look at it and see if it's something that was new. If it was new, I'd reverse engineer it and put it in my little toolbox. Don't upload the virus total either. From an incident response and forensics aspect, now I could also catalog that malware and leverage that to see if it had been in place anywhere else. So now we'll talk about the Internet of Bad Things. So the Internet was originally created October 29th, 1969. This is not a Friday night, by the way, guys. Okay, I want to make sure and point this out. This is actually Wednesday. And it started, and this is where the Internet began. But here we are today. Now, pardon me. As we know, once the Internet started up, there was a lot of commercialism, both legitimate commercial activities and not so legitimate commercial activities. Have we ever seen anything like this before, or is this the first time you're all seeing this? No, this is pretty known, right? So, you know, you get stuff like this that comes through. This was one of my favorite ones. Has your credit card been stolen on the Internet? Please put your credit card number in there, and we'll just click the button, and we'll find out for you. So, you know, and we started saying things, well, we started getting better. You know, we started noticing things like, you know, if it's got a link into it, maybe we should be careful with it. And then everything changed, the game changer. This guy, the Nigerian prince. And we all fell victim to that. Now, I have one bit of advice for all of you, so that way you all know. You don't simply inherit a Nigerian prince's fortune. It just doesn't happen. So how do we actually build a threat intelligence program? So being that I'm an optimist, well, and apparently very clumsy with my microphone, the journey starts with 1,000, you know, the 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Most people won't make it past 6,000. But most of us who are in this industry have that tenacious mentality that we just can't let things go. You know, some may call it obsessive. I think California may call it stalking by my ex-girlfriend's standards. I don't know. But we just can't let things go. So let's talk real quick about what threat intelligence is not. Okay. First of all, it's not the internet. The internet is a tool that plays into this. You know, it's not collecting stuff and not doing anything with it. Unless you're a hoarder and you have your own TV series, collecting stuff and doing nothing with it doesn't do you anything of value. You know, producing content that yields nothing of value. So, you know, it's sort of like my theory on vulnerability assessments that tell you you have 2,500 vulnerabilities in your environment. What does that really tell you? Not a whole lot. Well, same thing when it comes to threat intelligence. And what I started realizing is, you know, when I made the statement, well, the internet of bad things, I didn't quantify it. Click, time to go psycho on this. It's not a replacement for boots on the ground. You know, just because you know of bad things happening does not mean it's going to remove the necessity for analysts and operators to get in there and actually affect change. And it's not a substitute for monitoring your network, because if you're not monitoring your network, Yuri in Ukraine's probably going to be monitoring it, he's going to be patching it, he's going to be taking care of it, and then you'll find out when your name gets splashed on the Wall Street Journal. So what is threat intelligence? It's a process of collecting and processing information and analyzing it and taking it and making it actionable. What can I do with it once I have it? Okay, I know I have some bad stuff out there, but how do I fix it? So we walk through the planning phase all the way through the action, taking action, disseminating it to the proper personnel, processing it. All these areas fall into that. Or another little hamster wheel where you're continuously doing this. Because this is not something that you start and stop. This is something that you continuously do over and over. So from a planning aspect, you've got to know, you know, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to do? You know, what do you want to do with the results? Do we want to affect changes within our infrastructure? Do we want to advise people when they're traveling, what they should be aware of? You know, the next aspect is, one of the more critical aspects, is what is the quality of data that we're receiving? Are you trusting that information that comes in? These are all things that you need to assess during the actual planning stages. So the intelligence universe is comprised of different types of data. You have commercial sources that come from various vendors that would be more than happy that you signed up for them and get their content. Conferences such as this, sharing information. You know, what we're going to address and look at today is just these three aspects: the internet, human side, and then automate it. What can we automate? Because automation makes our life easier. Plus, the fact of the matter is 2.5 exabytes of data is being created on a daily basis. Probably a little bit more now, since this is from 2012, and that was 2 years ago, or 200 in internet time. But we have a lot of data to work with. So I will warn you, do not attempt to collect everything out there, because it will end up feeling like this, where you are trying to drink from that proverbial fire hose. Now, for those of you who don't have kids, trying to talk your spouse into allowing you to do this, I had to go to like JADED and get some Pandora bracelet charms. So the collection. Now that we've got what we know, what we've defined as our requirements, now we can start collecting the data. But then we have to start looking at, is it accessible? Is it timely? Is it current? You know, are we pulling information that's 3 years old down? Well, that may not buy us any value. Again, the entire purpose of having a threat intelligence program is to be able to take action, to be able to do something with it. So we have the internet, which is comprised of those previous resources. The human aspect, automated. So, you know, IRC. Does anybody still use IRC? Awesome. All right. You know, Twitter accounts, Facebook, all these areas that we can pull information from. You know, then internally, the automated side, you know, our firewalls, our honeypots, IDS, IPS, system logs, all these information, or all these aspects are sources for information. Data is available, not this data. Data from all over the globe. Now, why is this important when we're talking about data collection efforts, when specifically we're talking about the internet? I'm waiting for the tumbleweed to blow through the room. Is anybody in here and operating that does not communicate in some way, shape, or form utilizing the internet? Anybody still using carrier pigeons? No? Good. What's that? Fax machines? Okay. If that's the only way your organization does business, rock on. That would explain why I've not gotten my emails back from you guys. No, we're tied into this global network. So our misconception around, well, we're geographically based and we only have to protect ourselves against, those that are immediately around us is totally out the window. Last time I checked, it was in, the late 1800s, early 1900s when Mexico tried to invade us. And I don't think the Canadians really have it in them because they're too polite to come down from the north. However, it's out there. The fun part is you have all these little islands of data that are out there on the internet. And people will share them with you. You can ask them and say, hey, I noticed you have this. Can you provide? Can I get that on a regular basis? They'll publish that and they'll publish their information as far as what they're seeing. So this is a good thing because we like to share certain things. So I started looking at where I could find additional sources outside of my collection of honeypots that I had to either pay money for, as far as getting somebody a physical box to put on their network because my family still thinks I work for the Geek Squad, and they're not the most computer savvy bunch, to calling in favors with friends and talking with a couple of my customers and say, can we put this out there? And walking them through and how to get that, because the more data we have, remember the more you know thing, knowing's half the battle. The more information we get, the better we go. So I started looking at different types of source feeds where we're coming in, how that information gets into us. And it comes in a variety of formats. It'll come in text, HTML, binary, you name it. If it's out there, you can find it. So what I started looking at is, okay, well, we got information that's available, and it's in various formats. What do I do with it? So I parsed. Now, for all my Unix people out there, how many Unix people do we have? Yeah, I love Unix. It's got everything you actually need. But one of the values is it has a lot of tools in there, Perl, awk, sed, great things to be able to use to parse data out and normalize it. And when I say normalize, you want to be able to take all this information from all its various sources and put it into something that you can digest and manage. So analysis, that takes me right into the next section. Normalization is key. Being able to know and get the data down, condensed into a portion that you can use, you can swallow, and your organization can actually act upon. Validation. Are you pulling, do you have one random IP that showed up out of 200 different feeds? Well, that may not be the same. If you see the same IP across 200 feeds, it's probably something to take note on. Assessing the information. What is the likelihood? What is it? Is it a port scan? Is it a known botnet? Is it something that is along those lines? And when I say botnet, if you discover that one of your computer systems or several of your computer systems are communicating with a known botnet, is that a good thing? Not unless you're the bot herder who's making money on it, right? Categorizing the information. Again, being able to classify and take action on. Cross-source correlation, again, checking to see if the information that you're getting can be validated. Trust but verify. Gotta love Reagan. So what can we do once we get it? Well, when you produce threat intelligence information, again, it's got to be something that you can operationalize, that you can take action on immediately. If you see attacks that are occurring that are following the sun, if you can get out ahead of that and prevent those attacks, it saves time. Time responding, it saves money in response costs if something were to breach your system. Strategic in nature. Can you plan and execute within the timeline? It's got to be of value to the global enterprise. and it must be flexible. Ultimately, when we're talking about threat intelligence, it disseminates, and you share that information with two different aspects. You've got your core aspect of the business, which they understand bytes and binaries and DNS and all that stuff, right? No. They just know that it's supposed to work. Then we have the technical aspect. This is where we live at. If we know we have a bad threat actor coming from an IP address, we can block them, right? Are we awake? So from the business aspect, we can respond back with current network activity. What are we seeing on our network? One of the things that is interesting when we do our attack and penetration, we'll usually attempt to embed one of our folks in to monitor on the inside to see the activity of the organization. We keep them informed, but they don't share information with the client. The client shares it with us to find out when they see us and how, if they ever see us. Normally they don't. But I can tell you this, if I'm running nmaps and scans against you and I'm probing your network defenses for 2 weeks straight, and then all of a sudden I stop, is that an indicator? What might that indicate? Exactly. I found my way in. I no longer need to probe your network. I can take that information and issue travel advisories. Well, what do you mean travel advisories? You can geo-IP the address and get a good general understanding. It's not 100% accurate, but you can actually tell where threat attacks are coming from. So if you've got an executive and you're seeing a lot of activity come out of Latin America that's looking at trying to break into your network and they're getting ready to go down to take a look at one of their manufacturing plants, maybe you want to give them a disposable phone and a disposable laptop. Because if they're targeting your organization and they're coming from a central location, now you can issue a travel advisory. Tor network activity. Everybody familiar with Tor, the onion router network? Yeah. Does it have any commercial viable use in business today? What's that? Bitcoin? I've got to protect. It's okay, the NSA owns all the Bitcoin anyways. They also own all the exit nodes for Tor apparently, but it's what? Dogcoin? Okay. GoCoin? I'm sorry, what? So generally, if you see activity coming from a Tor network exit node, is that a good thing? Block it. Well, what if you can block it before it starts probing you? Unless, of course, you like to be probed. Then that's a totally different conversation and conference. Again, country of origin activity, where is it coming from? Technical side, updating our router access control list. How many of you allow traffic from anywhere on the internet? One honest person in here. I don't know how many times I will get a call from the incident response side of the house saying, we've been breached, we think it's from China. One, I'm like, why? Well, they're using as target right now. But my next question is, why are you allowing traffic from China? Do you have a manufacturing plant there? No. Do you have sales there? No. So you thought it'd be a good idea just to let them come on in. The Cisco, for all their work, they do have the ability to make some really restrictive access control. Now, coming from the Department of Defense side of the house, I believe in deny first and justify why I need to open it up later. Business takes some education on. Firewall rules. We can get very granular with firewall rules. IDS signatures, we can update those. DNS blockable, black holing certain activity. If we have systems that are trying to talk to a botnet and we can identify what that botnet is, we can adjust our DNS internally so that way they don't actually communicate. From a phishing aspect, if we know and identify known phishers, we can put those filters into place. Preparation and planning, this is the actual execution and implementation. So what happens when you see this type of activity on your network? How do you respond? Can you respond? Do you have the visibility into your network to see this happening at all? So from my aspect, when I started working on all of this, I started developing this with the fact that I'm cheap. So I'm going to use a Linux and BSD-based distribution. which I like because does anybody know what robust platform support stands for actually? It will run on the cheapest equipment that you can buy. Lets me use the native tools, can easily automate a lot of the functions through cron and bashes, or bash scripts and all this fun stuff. And I am a quintessential script kiddie because I'll write bash shells for everything. Has a wide selection of third-party tools that you can implement and use to help you, and it's highly customizable. And it allows me, especially with the virtualization side, I can create specific appliances that will do and listen for certain things. That way, if one service gets breached, it doesn't take down my entire honeypot and I've got to re-image and do everything again. I can start spinning up very specific aspects. So my initial proof of concept on all of this, make sure I'm not going ahead of myself. All the areas that looked into, when I say generate a database, and I don't know if there's any database administrators in here, all I did was actually just create a flat file that I shoved everything into. This is all 100% text that I used. Again, being a script kiddie, I customized this and automated as much as I could. And I'm doing all of this after I get all the honeypot information set up, and I'm pulling active feeds out everywhere. So that was the formation of my proof of concept of, well, what did I want to do with all this information that I'm collecting? So got an old system, threw Ubuntu on it, made my own tools, put on some custom scripts, had some storage. Again, had my original Dealey server Plaza up there, up and running, taking hits. Also now with my deployed honeypots. So I'm aggregating all this information together. Ultimately, this is what I said with it became really complex really quick, because I had friends and family and those who owed me favors and those who I had to, I don't want to say bribe, into providing me a home for these honeypots. But it all of a sudden became very big because I can't log into each one individually. I'm going to script that out and have them dump their information back in. My clicky no worky. So I created the queen bee, the hive, where all this information would come back from the honeypots. And I'd get all the information, so I had a central data aggregation point. I have all this information coming in that I can actually start putting to use. I can also historically store this, and what I started realizing is I really needed to learn how to use a database and actually build the infrastructure around that. So a quick visualization of just 5 nodes that I pulled at random. We started seeing some very unique things. Like we'd see high numbers of single point contacts, but then we started seeing, shared threat actors that are hitting multiple systems. And again, these are all geographically dispersed. So they're on different networks, they're on different organizations. But the interesting one was this one right here. We had 8 threat actors that were actually hitting all the different honeypots, which, given the size of the internet, sort of throws up a red flag. Wanted to take a look further into that. And this is just a snapshot over a very short period of time. So we have multiple threat actors that are touching just one server. We have multiple threat actors hitting 2, 3 servers, then hitting all of them. So that's pretty cool because now you can start there and say, the one-offs we don't have to worry about. We have to worry about the ones that are putting more emphasis in touching multiple touch points at this aspect. So the condensed concept of what I pulled out was my public and private data feeds, looking at where I was getting the data, cross-correlating it, assessing it for relevance, and most of this was relevant because, again, we were not broadcasting the information out there. There's nobody that should be touching these systems. We're not Amazon, we're not Google. Identifying common threat actors, identifying known bad URLs based upon information that we were capturing and logging. So first gen started off, I was only processing about between 320 to 655 megs of data hourly, based upon all the different aspects that I was seeing. Then I realized that my system that I was using was too small, so I ended up upping the ante, because now I was processing at present between 650 to 820 megs per hour, which I can only tell you what that does to your electric bill at home. Does not make for a happy spouse. So built out different workflows. The first thing I needed to do was, get my download of known malicious actors from various sites, create the database, and then what I call the George Bush inspired shell script, the find evildoers. Built in different routines around that. And what I ended up doing was every day I'd come down, get into my office, open up, and I'd have a nice little email from my system that told me, this threat agent was attacking these systems, and I started building out an actual report. Now, I did that because of the fact that my primary focus in the business side, outside of the technical, is around governance, risk, and compliance areas, which is not a way to meet anybody who doesn't understand that. Because you can sit there and say, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I break into banks, and like people will come up and talk to you, and then if you say you work in GRC, they're like, I'm going to leave now. But ultimately, what I ended up doing was starting generating those reports. Now, this is just for my own edification. And then I started looking at doing some geo IP location, visualization around, where these threat agents are coming from. So the current state, I got to see who was interested in little old me. I had to be able to identify, or I had now had the ability to identify new attack profiles, identify malicious software attacks, botnets. I also started having the ability now to start planning mitigation aspects. Because if I started seeing something hit upstate New York, I could now distribute that out to any number of people and change and prevent them from being attacked. So an operational aspect, update my firewall rule sets, update router ACLs, clean systems, because now I can go through and if I've got malware that I found on one system, I can hash an entire file system and say, oop, this potentially is bad, let's take a look at it and clean it. Draw maps of interest, I like to draw things. So what I ended up doing is once I had the proof of concept server up and running, I was using this to run everything on. I then created the necessity, again, adding additional complexity by creating a workstation that would pull feeds and information right off the server, so that way I wasn't taxing the server. What I discovered is that I needed actual better hardware, more gooder hardware. If there was any chance that this was ever going to go into a production environment. I don't want to sit there at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to support something I built with a Band-Aid, rolling, and duct tape to get it up and operational. So I actually started figuring out, okay, what are the specifications of a platform like this and what should they have? Again, I really needed to learn how to do database stuff. So running the scripts, ran out and got things from the interweb, and again, pulling from multiple sources. Once I get it back, build my quasi-database so I can actually use it. So I find my evildoers on my network. That way I can take a look and see what's going on. So this is my home network, a lot of virtual systems. I am the proud owner of a actual operating AS400, which people ask me, well, why do you do that? Because it's cool to say you have an AS400. And because I'd never have the opportunity ever again, from a security aspect, to ever try new things when I'm doing attack and pen, because most businesses get a little when it comes to that. So 92 systems in total. I went out and pulled the logs, and this is the actual script that I used to find my evildoers. Now, I pulled 3 months worth of data. It processed in about 20 minutes. Once I did the cross-correlation, I was able to do that in just over an hour. And identified that I was going to have to do additional analysis, because what I discovered was that 28 domains were flagged. Now, some of them I put in there specifically, or they flagged because they were small URLs, and they were just more cautious, or I had created them to be more cautious. 17 that were here were associated with a incident response that we were doing, where the information that was provided back came out of a sandbox around that, but it had captured the logs from the system, so that's what flagged. And then I had 3 that required some additional looking into because I could not account for how access to those systems was maintained. Out of 226 or 2,026 bad IPs that were flagged, 1,580 had tried to come into my network. Now, not a big issue because most of them were blocked. What was the big issue was the fact that 446 calls were made out to known bad IPs. So that set up the red flags on my end. But again, being more curious, you know, it's going to be the death of me. I know it will be. I kept asking that question, you know, okay, what next? What next? Why now? How can I go forward? So again, more questions I kept, or the more answers I got, the more questions I'd start or keep having. What could I do to make it better? Does anybody ever do something mediocre? Anybody ever start a project that you start and you're not happy with, so you have to go back and do it over again? Yeah, that's me. I have to keep refining it. But back to the original aspect of, you know, the original questions which were asked, you know, who would attack us? We're in Ohio. Well, basically if you're on the internet, everybody's going to attack you, or you have the potential of being attacked by everybody. Comments like we're too small to be on anybody's radar, or we don't have a large footprint. There is no such thing as we're too small. Initially, when I started out, like I mentioned, the server that I put up was listing on 2 ports on a single IP address. I could have went with 1, but I think 2 quantifies as having a small footprint. Would everyone agree? Okay. So, addressing the aspect of what we don't have anything that anybody would want, or why would people attack us? Well, this is a common business mistake, because the way we view our systems and assets is totally different than the way a criminal organization does. You know, it's the new trend of what criminal currency is. Because if I optimize and take over a network and I get access to those systems, I can monetize that for different nefarious uses. So everything from hosting websites, stealing email to be used later in spam attacks or just spam in general. You know, crypto locker. That was a, you know, we're going to encrypt your hard drive, and if you don't respond within the next 48, 72 hours, you'll never get it back. Pay $300, $200. Theft. Again, organizations target other businesses because they have money. Go where the money's at. You know, Yahoo malware distribution that took over to actually use systems to mine Bitcoin. That happened over in the EU. You know, taking over reputational information, social media. This is the way a criminal is going to look at your systems and your networks and your organization. We have this mindset of a lot of times it's, you know, well, it's just a file server. It doesn't really have any protected information or critical information. That's the wrong mentality to have. You know, we don't let people into our homes and let them stay in a room rent-free, do we? Unless you have 19 and 20-year-old children that are going to college. But for the most part, you know, this is no different than anything else on that aspect. Criminals view it very differently. They will monetize it, they will use it, and it's an expendable resource for them. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what did I define with my threat intelligence program that I built out? Well, I quantified that, you know, the internet, it's a bad place. It's not all unicorns, fuzzy bunnies, and rainbows. I verified that the internet, if you're on the internet, yes, you will be a target. Does that really shock anybody in this day and age? How many of you have had to work with your executive staff to get them to understand and accept that that is part of life on the internet? Okay. So ultimately what I learned, this is what I learned. You know, I was going to have to go back ultimately and gain some additional information. Found some bad things on my own network that I hadn't planned. and I was going to have to go back and start over. Because it worked kinda. It proved what I needed to in regards to being accused of being a FUD peddler. It did produce actionable results. So I got information that I can now turn around and take. 5 minutes? Or are you just high-fiving? All right. So again, going back to the self-deprecating self of I need to learn how to use a database. So those were my lessons learned from that. So I reached out to a couple of colleagues of mine and said, hey, I need a second set of eyes on this. They helped me, and they are all from within the threat intelligence community in some way, shape, or form. So this is ultimately what we came up with, and at the long term, this is what we've ended up developing. We were able to create a web-based interface. We're pulling public and private data sources. We're creating actionable intelligence. We're generating reports out of it. We're able to see what malware is out there. We're able to help incident responders deal with that, as well as develop new attack and penetration methods. So that is ultimately what we ended up with, and that is all that I have. Any questions? We were looking at IP logs to see, what's that? Oh, blocks. No, we were looking at individual IP addresses at that time. One of the intents that we are going to move down is we are looking at how to incorporate a way to say, you know, if X number of IPs coming out of this network block are doing bad things, then we need to take a look at that network block as a whole. So, does that earn a ticket? I've got 2 tickets. All right, come up and get your ticket. Actually, let's see, I'm not that young, but jump! Oh, good Lord. Feedback time. All right, any other questions? I use, what is it, and I'm not peddling their software. I tend to use, what is it, MaxMind's GeoIP, predominantly because they offer a free version. And for my purposes, I don't need to get down to the street level to find out. I just need to know general country of origin. But there's a number of services out there. You can use Google Maps. You can use any number of ways to visualize that and get that information. Any other questions? Yes. If you recall, one of the things that I had mentioned early on regarding what threat intelligence isn't, it's that those boots on the ground that are monitoring your network. This will take care of a lot of the excess noise and background and the nuisance aspects, but it's by far no means a replacement for having somebody that's actually watching and monitoring what's going on in your network. It's still a work in progress, but to answer the question in the shortest form, it's still, at this stage it was reactive, what it allowed us to do is share that information with other nodes and other users to prevent them from being attacked as well, using the same methodology or the same IP address or the same scan information.
We're running short on time, so any other questions we could take out in the common area?
Come gain your ticket for swag since you were the last questionnaire. Chocolatier.